Hello there. Well, it's time for Star Wars Episode 6 Return of the Jedi 8M4 Using the Force. This is the original version, not the one used in the film, because otherwise we're missing half of the cue. Music by John Williams, orchestrated by Herb Spencer, the superb Herb Spencer. So, yes, it basically segues from the Ewoks sort of tribal stuff into this seemingly atonal element, but actually I've worked out that all of these notes are kind of octatonic mostly. Especially this sort of seemingly unusual mode in the harp. So it's mostly octatonic. It's just missing out a few notes because the harp only has 7 different strings. So there we go. That's the reason why. But the synth glisses all the way up and kind of follows the violins, which go up here. This is jumping to that note. It's just difficult to kind of show on the reduction, but basically that's what's happening. And we go from this sort of octatonic collection into B flat minor, because the Force theme here is in B flat minor. There we go, the Force. And this is where Luke uses it, essentially, obviously. Actually, I don't really want to do that. I want to make that... no, stop. Yeah, I just want to make that bold, just to be consistent with other things I've got. There we go. Done. And you'll see that the vibraphone here, which is not obvious from there, but I'll put it in there, doesn't play the root note. In fact, nothing does. I don't know what that's doing there. It's only this, which is quite unusual, actually. I feel that the reason for that is that it then creates a sort of, a suspension, basically, which is exactly what's sort of going up. Well, it is going up. C-3PO is going up, but that's basically what's happening. And we've got these sort of little cello tutti elements as well, which is really unusual as well. Then followed by this little celeste and harp sort of B flat minor with a sharp 4, sort of typical type of sort of John Williams smudge. Originally then it went from this, where we have an enharmonic shift, by which I mean that the C sharp is actually the D flat from B flat minor, but it's also the dominant, F sharp minor, which is what it's going to, which is a really unusual shift, really. You could argue that it's some sort of, basically it's an enharmonic shift, but it's also, I suppose, a tertial shift as well, a sort of tertiary shift down by a major third. It doesn't look like it, but if that was G flat minor, then it would be. However, of course, F sharp minor is a little bit more favourable. And all of the harmony changes to B minor in that point. And actually, it's not really B minor, it's B major, and in fact B Lydian, so B with a sharp 4. Then we've got all 4 horns, which is unusual, actually, given the fact that everything is quite light. But they are marked mezzo piano at that point. And then we have a really interesting chord here, which for some reason I've neglected to sort of add. But we have D major, but over F natural, which is interesting. Whoops. Like that. So we have this sort of really weird major minor stuff here. So that's my F natural, which I'm just going to kind of just put in there, which is really unusual. And it perhaps has this sort of feeling of unease in some ways, which again is sort of quite unusual. We've then got a mixture of trem and trills, which go on. All of the strings basically do all of that sort of stuff for pretty much the entire cue. Then we've got this sort of vibraphone type of sequence going down. So let's just make that sort of obvious. Then we got this sort of D add 2, but then block chordal harmonization as well in major keys, because it's all sort of, you know, R2 making friends with Wicket and that sort of stuff. We've then got harp picking out the notes of the violas, which is what these are. Hopefully it's sort of obvious given the range, but actually I'll just put it in anyway. Just double basses, no cellos at that bit. It's quite delicate. And then we've got consort trumpets, again in sort of block chordal in second inversions as well. All major chords. So it's a sort of whole tone element right at the very, very end. And then that's reflected in imitation. The same thing, this sort of little fragment here is there in the flutes as well, triadically. Horns just convey the same note. I think there's actually a mistake in the original score there, which gave that, which is a bit strange. I can't hear that. It could be there because of the celeste, actually, which is sort of, but it's actually an octave higher there. This will be sounding there. So it's exactly the same as the flutes. So we're sort of D-based for that bit, and then we then have another shift really to G minor because of this, which is this sort of suspended harmony, and then a shift upwards, which is really interesting. Which again is a tertial shift as well. So I'll just make sure that that's a bit more obvious. Tertial, in other words, shifting by threes of whatever form. And then we have this sort of little B9 type sort of thing, or B2 if you want to call it that as well. Let's call it a B. Add 2. No, let's just call it a B9. So then it ends on B, but then we have another, you know, sort of C major block chordal harmonization as well. And then we also have the trumpets as well as the celeste, which are playing these sort of block chords, all in second inversion. Again, a little bits of imitation, more imitation. And then this really lovely chord right at the end, which is where I've sort of said, note the low clarinets, note there's a bass clef here. So it's just something to keep an eye on. It's quite an unusual voicing, really, if you think about it. But in a sense, it's filling out those two notes, which are left as a gap in the strings, where you've got sort of violin ones probably playing in octaves, violin twos in octaves, and then violas. Just the D sharp, probably the cellos divided, and then double bass at the end. But notice how they're filling up that sort of middle register that's sort of missing there. But notice that the only notes playing the root are not the strings at all. Again, it's that sort of feeling of suspension that sort of brings to mind this feeling of no, you know, lack of roots at that particular point. And the only roots are in the harp. Which is really interesting, and of course the absolute bass, which I think helps draw out that harp, and you sort of take notice of it. Notice that after the here, it just goes up in whatever the nearest possible harmony note is in B, apart from that one where there's a gap. It could have ended up on a D sharp, but it's probably more sensible to make it end up on an F sharp, because that's what the first violins are doing at that particular point. The edits, what you hear is that from this bit, this is cut completely, and you can hear it. That doesn't come in, it just sort of abruptly cuts, goes into, I think it goes into bar 17, which is this bit here, just suddenly misses out that bar at that point, and then it goes back into it again, and replays it, and eventually you sort of get to it. I think maybe the sequence was extended somewhat in the special edition, possibly. Can't spell at all. There we go. But yeah, another sort of really short cue, but again, sort of really full of textural interest at this particular point. Just note the different sorts of colours which you know, Williams generates. of course, absolutely all with the picture as well, you know, as C-3PO sort of rises, you know, on his throne, and then Luke uses the Force at this bit. And of course we hear the Force theme, a little fragment of it as well. Sort of really tremendous. And then it's all sort of happy and joyous, and you know, one of the moments of sort of joy before the big battle sort of commences as well. So again, a very short cue, but again full of interest, and we'll move on to the next one, which will be quite fun to do. Let me just have a quick look ahead. What I tend to do is, if I've got it right, look at Frank's wonderful thematic catalogue, and he has a cue list here of what's going on. So after this thing, we've got part of the tribe, possibly a bit of Langford there, and then bedtime stories. I'll have a sort of quick look at that and see what happens, and then the amazing brother and sister, which I think I'm going to redo, because I have done it before actually. If you have a trawl through, if you just sort of type it in as a search, I have actually done it before, but it probably warrants extra special look at, because it's mentioned in On the Track by Carlin and Wright, which is the classic film scoring book, before Andy Hill did Scoring the Screen, which is also a fantastic book, by the way. So well worth a look at. So there we go. So it's really good to sort of really see the dots on the page. It's not good enough really just to sort of hear it in your head. It's just, you're going to miss everything really, unless you've got unbelievably good ears. But you know, who would have thought there's a synth there? You know, these sorts of little additions are really important to get. So that's all for now, folks, and I will see you again very soon. Bye for now.